All right, now we're ready. Okay, so this workshop is going to be about how to prototype and how to MVP. And I like to call it how to kind of do something really fast. And so the first question is, what's the check-in code? It's UR MVP. And then so check-in, yeah. And I'll have this kind of at the bottom left as much as possible. So if you don't know the check-in code, it should usually be there. So the question is, what is an MVP? So an MVP it's the name of the first episode of Silicon Valley, and it's named after this because the MVP is basically the bare bones version of your product, and it basically is just this. It's most commonly known from Silicon Valley, and yeah, so that's the workshop. Hope you guys really enjoyed, and yeah, okay, so it's not really the entire workshop, but that was my top tier joke. But so we're gonna now start about kind of why should I build an MVP. So obviously Richard Hendricks does do this in Silicon Valley. It's a good enough meme that if you kind of Google in like Silicon Valley threads, it's commonly thrown out a lot. They kind of say MVP here and there. And so, like I talked a little bit earlier, an MVP is the bare bones version of your product. And this sentence here, it represents the simplest working representation of what your product will do. Is we're going to kind of go back to this a lot. And so the reason why we want to build an MVP is because we don't know if our idea is good yet. So when I say MVP, you could think about, instead of building a minimal version of a product, you could try to ship like the finalized version of a product. So like, say I have an idea for like a restaurant, I could just make all the dishes and have my friends try it like a lemonade style, or I could go ahead and open a restaurant. And so the MVP is just like the lemonade stand, or the actual product is like building out a whole restaurant. And so in this case, the reason you want to build an MVP is you don't know if your idea is good yet. And I can say from experience, oftentimes your ideas sound great, and then when you execute on them, you'll realize that you might have gotten some things significantly wrong. So the idea with MVP is that it should be significantly easier to build than a fully fleshed out version, because it's not going to be complete. It's intentionally not going to be the complete and latest version. And so there's a famous quote by Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn, that says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, then you've launched too late. And what that kind of gets to is that you shouldn't be spending we shouldn't be spending like a year on building an MVP. You should be kind of building it out and shipping it as soon as possible. And we'll kind of talk about the benefits of shipping early and kind of getting feedback. So why would I use an MVP? Because it's such a minimal version of the product. Why is anyone going to use it, right? Like if I want to make a restaurant, why would I just kind of make a lemonade stand? Because who's going to go to a lemonade stand and spend money there? And so the answer is, yeah, no one's going to use your MVP. Like that's the point. The point of an MVP isn't to get everyone to use it, but the point is to get feedback from it. While an MVP may gather traction, there are some examples of MVPs actually working and MVPs like going big. One of the big examples is a company called Calendly. Basically, they accidentally launched their MVP of their calendar scheduling software, and they didn't realize they had launched. But so many people ended up using it that they kind of raised their funding by accident. Like people were flooding the system without a payment system being added. That's very rare. Most likely, your MVP is going to fail, and the goal of your MVP is to kind of get feedback and learn from it. So this is going to be kind of the steps to how to build MVP, and then we're going to come back to this over and over again. So basically, step one is kind of determine the problem you're trying to solve. So like with my restaurant example, the problem I'm trying to solve is make better food, because I think outside food is okay. We can discuss potential solutions to this problem. So like, what kind of food are we going to make? I'm going to make Indian food. I'm going to make falafel. These are what I want to eat right now. So that's what I'm thinking about. And so you can kind of discuss potential solutions to it. And then you want to devise a low code or minimal effort solution. So rather than like, develop a full menu, maybe just try some things, like something small. And now that you have like a low code minimal solution, so my low code minimal solution for my restaurant idea is just setting up a lemonade stand, but instead of selling lemonade, I'm going to sell Indian food. And then I'm going to test the solution out with innovators. I'll get to what that means in a second. And then we'll gather feedback from these innovators or whoever we're testing it out with. And if it doesn't seem to work, we'll go back to step one. And if it did work, great. We can kind of now iterate on this idea and move a little bit more. So yes, we'll be talking about Glide apps a little bit. So when I talk about, so I mentioned innovators. So innovators is technically us because we are ACM Innovate. But really when I talk about innovators, I'm talking about this chart. You might have seen this in a business class if you've taken it. And if you haven't taken a business class, this is about all you'll learn in the business classes. So congrats. In the business classes, you'll learn about this thing called the product adoption curve. And so basically it breaks up all the people who will use a product into like 5 main categories. And the key thing to focus in is the earliest users is all you really want to care about initially. Because initially, if you try to go for the middle, try to go for the kind of the big chunk of users, you're not going to get anyone on it because you don't know what you are building yet. You don't know what your product is. And so you want to kind of focus in on the innovators who can be some of your most passionate users, and they'll kind of give you a good direction of where you want to go with your product. I also have a star by innovators because sometimes you might be your best user. We'll talk about some examples where you might not actually have anyone to test your food out with. Maybe you're a terrible cook, and before you want to actually test out your food with other people, you might want to eat it yourself. Like you yourself is really, you want to be your best user, and this practice is often called dog fooding, where you kind of test your own product. But yeah, so you want to use it yourself, and also with interviews, you can get better feedback by just asking yourself questions like, did I enjoy this? No, I did not. And you can kind of move on from there. And if any of you are design majors or cognitive science majors, you might have noticed that I effectively have just copied the design process because we've defined the problem. We're going to collect some information and kind of develop a simple idea. We're going to develop a solution. We're going to present our ideas to others for some feedback, and we're going to improve on it. And so this kind of like cycle is what we're going to kind of be referring to a lot. So this is a ton of information, and it's kind of, sure, I guess that makes sense, but it's kind of more interesting to talk about real life examples. So we're going to talk about a first example, which is a very fun product called Google Glass. And so I want to kind of ask everyone, how long do you think it took Google Glass to build the first MVP? Because the first MVP of Google Glass, remember, like Google Glass, for those of you who don't know, it's like this high-tech glasses. It projects digital information on their face. So I'm saying 2 years, I'm saying 1 year. Oh yeah, rip, Google Glass was canceled, 1.5 years. Cool. So yeah, with such a complex product, you imagine it would take a long time. So the actual answer is it took them 1 day to build the initial prototype. And what they did is, instead of actually, focusing on all the technology, they kind of looked at and say, what's our problem? Our problem is we think people need to have like something. I don't really understand what the problem is, honestly, but their problem was like, we want people to have access to their internet as they go. And their solution that they wanted to test is, can I digitally overlay content in front of you? And so what they did is they just took a sheet protector. If you've taken back in the olden days when we went to like in-person schools and we gave assignments in person. So in those days, we used to use this thing called sheet protectors, and you put like project. It's basically, you could just project something with the projector on the sheet projector, and you can kind of put it inside your head. It looked ridiculous, but you can kind of get the general idea of what does it look like to have content digitally overlaid in front of you. And immediately after doing this, they figured out, wait, I don't have like a touch screen or a stylus. Like they kind of realized problems immediately that you might have not realized just by kind of thinking out about this. And so now that they realize this is so unfamiliar, what do I do with this visual overlay? They're able to further iterate and saying, okay, how can we prototype taking in user input, and how long, how do I get user input? So now, kind of based on the last question, I'm going to have another question. How long do you think it took for the Google Glass team to prototype user input? Because now you have this little bit of an overlay. Now they need to kind of get user input with your hands. So we have a week. Yeah, we're in the right time frame. How long do you think it took? 1 week. All right, so that's our official guess. So 1 week, it's a pretty good guess. The actual answer was 45 minutes, but we're in a lot better, 3.14 days. That's also a good guess. So yeah, we're in a much better time frame, but the actual time it took was 45 minutes. And basically all they did is they just kind of, nice job, Ivy. The reason they were to do this is all they did is they kind of had your initial crazy looking thing on top of your head, and then they just kind of put 2 hairbands to like control your hand. And when you move the left hand and you move the right hand, we basically hit left and right on a presentation clicker. So you can just kind of flip the presentation. And by doing this, they were able to kind of simulate this environment of, can I swipe left, swipe right, swipe left through like an image gallery. They hooked up the presentation clicker so they can kind of read emails. And what they realized is this looks super weird in public, and it's not pleasant at all. And it's kind of useful though for small use cases. If I just want to quickly view something, it's kind of cool. But to do anything intensive, like actually typing an email, this is weird. And they also realize how clunky it can look like. And this let them iterate further. It also helped them realize that it's super heavy and super weird interface, like kind of walking around. And so then they realized what the things they had to prioritize was a different kind of feedback system. And also they have to realize that they can't put too much in the Google Glasses. Now, if I was a director here, I would have kind of said this is where you should probably kill the project, but they kind of built the whole thing and then they realized a little bit later that people were never going to use this. But yeah. And also this entire thing I kind of talked about is me kind of stealing a TED talk by the guy who helped build it, Tom Chi, and it's a TED talk. So I have a link to that and I'll show that after. But so what are the two biggest takeaways I have from this Google Glass presentation is that one, you want to find the quickest path to experience because doing something is going to result in learning, right? If we just kind of sat around thinking about Google Glass, like this idea of like super cool glasses that can show technology in front of you, we can kind of come up with different ideas and problems. But as soon as you build a prototype, you kind of run into so many more problems right away. And so that's what I really want to get you to thinking about. Like rather than trying to build the actual thing, try to get something that's very similar to the experience of what you're going to get to. And immediately you can kind of develop, you can figure out what the actual problems are going to be. Because no matter how much you think, you're never going to actually understand the problems involved until you actually do it. And so that's kind of the two biggest takeaways I have from this. So now let's talk about, so in this example, the actual iterating and testing wasn't really with people. It was just kind of with the Google Glass team. So let's talk about a different example where they use other people. So we're going to talk about a company called Stitch Fix. So Stitch Fix is a company that does online personal styling. It uses recommendation algorithms and a lot of data science to personalize clothing items based on size, budget, and style. It's a $1.6 billion company doing very well. And basically the way it works is like you kind of send in information about yourself and they will send you clothing items that they think will best match your personality. And if you like them, you get to keep them and you just pay them a fee to keep the items. So Stitch Fix itself, the problem kind of came out when Katrina Lake, the co-founder, when she realized when she was in Harvard Business School that a lot of people want to dress better, but because they're so busy with their careers, they have no time to shop. But then people still will judge you for not looking good. And so she was thinking, what's the solution? And she noticed that a lot of the rich people at Harvard had personal shoppers. But she's like, I'm not rich. So how can we think about doing this? And the biggest reason personal shopping is super expensive is because you have to go with your personal shopper and your personal shopper will help you. And there's like a lot of communication there because the belief was that you need to have personal shoppers. It's a Harvard East Coast thing. She was very confused too because I think she's from Silicon Valley. But the thing is, most people don't have access to it. And what she was thinking is like, maybe we don't really need to like have a personal shopper. Maybe we can kind of reduce it to just a survey. And so she developed a prototype for this just by using Google Forms, Google Sheets, and a nice credit card. So in the early days of Stitch Fix, she basically just went around asking friends in the Boston area to fill out style surveys. And she went out and just bought a ton of clothes with her credit card and kept track of all the receipts in the return policy. And then basically she would just give them the stuff and then ask how it would work. And so when she set out to do this, she set out to have with a few different goals in mind. Her first question was like, how big of an inventory do I need? If I'm going to be a personal shopper for everyone, how many clothing items do I need to have ahead of time? And then so I can choose. And then how many options do I need to give to someone? Like if I'm going to go ahead and shop without you being there and I give you the options I think will be best for you, how many different types of clothing do I need to give you? I need to give you 10, 15, 25, whatever. And then she also wanted to see, is anyone going to really use this? Like, why would anyone use a thing where all you did was fill out a quick Google form about saying, yes, I like blue? Like, how are you going to be able to take that? And so that was her other question. Can you learn enough about someone's style through a survey? And so she did this for a couple months while in Harvard. And what she realized is, one, it works. Two, you do need a somewhat large inventory, but return policies work really well. So basically, she just had a $6,000 credit limit and she bought everything and then returned it all. Like every month, she would just kind of buy and return. And if someone wanted it, she just wouldn't return that particular item. She also realized that people didn't need that many items. The actual number that they had was around 5 to 6. People don't want more than that because no one's going to try that much stuff on. And they also realized that a survey was enough to kind of learn someone's style. And so you can kind of see how Stitch Fix itself is a really complicated business now. It's very logistics heavy and very data science heavy. And there's a ton of like complex analytics that goes on in it. But she was able to kind of replicate and simulate such a complex idea without actually developing website. Like she had no coding experience, nothing like that. She just built this whole thing by just, giving people surveys, and she had a Google Sheets document where she kind of wrote things down. Yeah. So we're going to talk about some tools. So now we've kind of learned about 2 cool ideas where they did use prototyping to figure out what to do. And we're going to talk about some tools on how to actually build this. So this next presentation is kind of taken from a class called CC 190, where we kind of learned about this thing called paper prototyping. So let's take a step back and kind of think about what a prototype is. So a prototype is going to be ugly. It's not going to be design preview, and it's going to be a rough sketch that kind of captures the essence of what you want to build, right? So like if I'm like with the Google Glass idea, right? It's not at all. This doesn't look like this at all, right? It just kind of tells you what it's going to be from a high level. This is a design preview, and so you kind of, but it still captures the essence of it, right? It's still overlaying something digitally over you. And so the question is kind of what can be a prototype? Pretty much anything, as long as it's kind of simple enough to build. And you'll note that role play and experiences does count as it. So the kind of idea of how to build a paper prototype is this idea of Wizard of Oz testing. If you've taken, I think, COGS 120, they also talk about this a little bit. But basically the idea of Wizard of Oz prototyping is you have a wizard, which is basically the magic that actually will change things around, a facilitator, so someone who basically tells you how the product's going to work, and some kind of visual to help the person use it. So like in this example here, this is a prototype for the Wii U. And so so the person who's testing is, they're just messing around. And the facilitator is like saying, okay, hey, you want to open up a game. So if the person taps in the game, the wizard will secretly just swap out the pieces of paper. And the goal with the Wizard of Oz testing is you can kind of get to, you can kind of create the experience with really low effort. And this way you can immediately gather feedback and saying, hey, is this idea making any sense? Does this flow make sense? Is it intuitive? And you can kind of in real time see things. Oh yeah, I'm saying COGS 120 just because I've seen people do it. I have not taken COGS 120. I recommend CSE 190. CSE 190 is a really cool class. I took it with Rival, which is a super cool class. We learn about that. I have heard mixed things about COGS 120, but I do know they teach this. So yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of just breezing through this. There's not much kind of to it. Really with prototyping and all this, it's kind of about actually doing it. But yeah. And then the last tool I'm going to talk about is low code websites. So we are ACM, so we have to talk a little bit about coding. And so because I don't want to code, we're not going to actually code. So we're going to talk about a couple different websites that let you kind of build minimal versions of a product without actually doing any coding. So one of these products is called Glide Apps. There's also Bubble and Webflow. And the general idea with these things is that you can a lot of these websites exist to kind of just test out things. I should probably be sponsored by Glide. So I actually did make this thing here. It's called Tutor Hub. And so I had this brilliant idea for a one-stop shop for tutoring. It's a place where students can request help and tutors can accept jobs. And so I kind of just built this in around an hour and a half. And what's kind of cool is you can kind of just test it out. So this thing is very simple. And all it is basically a spreadsheet. And you can kind of see people are posting things like this. You can reach them out. You can make listings, I believe, with this button here. Cry for help. Title, I don't understand what's going on in 140. Help, have never been to lecture. What is going on? And I cannot spell. And then I'm willing to pay $10 per hour for help. I go to UC San Diego. It's published today. My email is arm.edu. My phone number is 555. Not giving my real number on this. And we can add it. And I believe it should load, or unless I might have pulled up the free plan with all my random test things. But yeah, so this is kind of like, you can see we can just build a prototype of this. And if I actually pull up the code involved in it, it's fairly simple because all it really is just a Google sheet. And I actually didn't do any of it myself. I found the template on the website and I copied it and then just changed the names. Because this is the actual database. So if I pull up the database, it's just a spreadsheet saying, here are the requests, instructions page, about page. And so you can see it's fairly simple, and you can see some relics of how I just copied someone else's marketplace app. And so apps like this are really nice because you can kind of build out a really quick preview of what you want to see. You can send it out immediately and kind of get feedback and say, okay, are people using this at all? Is this useful at all? And you can kind of iterate from there. And so that's kind of it for my workshop. Here are some resources. I realize I went very under time, but yeah, it's kind of like my biggest takeaway at MVPing and prototyping is like it's a relatively simple concept. The main thing you want to kind of think about is just how do I develop a prototype for something. So here's some resources I've cited, super cool things. These are the resources I've cited within the presentation. So I've copied a lot of slides from that. And these are things I haven't mentioned, but they're super interesting. A lot of the idea about MVPs and shipping early comes from this guy named Eric Ries. He started a company called, I don't even know what it's called, basically like a virtual online world thing. I do not have a startup right now. And basically Eric Ries's general idea was that you should ship early and kind of iterate from there. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask right now. And if you have any ideas, I can kind of try to give you a low code prototype. Oh yeah, I can talk a little about Platter. So Platter was a startup I did try to do. And I can tell you first and foremost, I did not do the MVP prototyping system. And throughout the whole system, I realized that we should be doing MVPs because with Platter, I actually went in and we developed a really highly complex like app the entire way. And what we learned kind of like halfway through is that we should not have done that because more towards the end, that's the core concept wouldn't really work during COVID and it didn't make complete sense to test it out. And I also realized that if I had done some more testing, I would have figured out really early on that the key business is going to be in helping small businesses. So Platter was this idea I had to kind of sell homemade food, like a DoorDash kind of thing. And so, yeah, yeah. So if you have any, does anyone have any ideas on how to build, on any ideas that they want a low code or no code prototype for? What is the chat talking about? 4-year plans. Okay, so yeah, uh, there's this great website. It's called plans.ucsd.edu. It's pretty cool. You can select your college, and then you can put in your year, your major. What is my major? Yeah, and then I have this button here, and then I can go ahead and like swap things out. So I can say I have taken this already, and put like, oh, whoops, that's bad. I'm taking, oops, 42, CC 42 instead. Yeah, this is my great website. Where are the prereqs? Why do I like this one? I don't actually use any of these. I just kind of figure out my schedule each quarter and hope it works out. And sometimes I don't get into classes. Bryce, the website is static. What I have is this is basically like a bookmark that just sets the content to be editable. And so I can just kind of do things. So I can go to UCSD and say, welcome back, Tritons. Join ACM Innovate at acmurl.com/ACM, oh, sorry, innovate-discord. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, this is the workshop. I think we went pretty quickly. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to pitch me. And if you want to talk more about this kind of stuff, we talk about this in the Innovate Discord a lot, kind of send random things. But yeah, cool. And then make sure to check in. I'm going to check in right now, actually. I never check into my own events. So let's do that. You are MVP. Nice. I got some points. By the way, if any of you want to ever sign in and get points for me, you can feel free to edit my profile. I don't really mind. But my credentials is, this is my password. So feel free to sign in for me at events. Yeah. Cool. All right, that is the event. I'm gonna stop recording.